The moment I stepped into the hotel, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the peeling wallpaper, the musty scent that clung to the air, or the dim lighting that cast everything in an eerie half-shadow. No, it was the way the front desk clerk watched me with that unsettling, too-wide smile. I had booked the place online, thinking I'd found a hidden gem in the countryside, a small, cozy hotel off the beaten path. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, my instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave. "Welcome," the front desk clerk said, her voice like sandpaper scraping across wood. "You must be Mr. Collins?" "Yeah," I replied, shifting uneasily under her gaze. "Room 303. The smile she gave me in response made my skin crawl. "Ah, yes. Room 303. The best room we have." She slid an old-fashioned key across the desk toward me. No modern keycards here, just a rusted brass key with a tag that looked as ancient as the building itself. I tried to shake off the strange feeling as I took the key and headed toward the elevator. But as the doors opened with a groan and I stepped inside, I noticed something odd. The panel had buttons for floors 1, 2, 4, and 5. But there was no third floor listed. I pressed the button for the second floor instead, deciding I'd take the stairs up one level. Maybe the elevator was just old, and they didn't bother labeling the third floor. But even as I reassured myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The second floor hallway was long and silent, the kind of silence that felt oppressive, like it was waiting for something. As I walked toward the stairwell, I swore I could hear the faintest whisper, as if someone was speaking just out of earshot. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. Just that suffocating silence. I forced myself to move again, pushing open the heavy door to the stairwell. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I ascended, each step echoing loudly in the narrow space. When I reached the landing for the third floor, I hesitated. There was no sign indicating it was the third floor, just a plain wooden door with a brass handle. My hand shook as I reached for it, half expecting it to be locked. But it wasn't. It swung open easily, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The hallway was different from the others. The wallpaper was a sickly yellow, curling at the edges, and the floorboards beneath the thin carpet creaked ominously as I stepped forward. There were no sounds here, no faint buzz of electricity, no hum of distant voices. It was as if this floor had been forgotten, abandoned by time. Room 303 was at the very end of the hallway. As I approached, I noticed something strange about the door. It looked older than the others, the wood warped and splintered in places. There was no nameplate, just the numbers, 303, crudely carved into the wood as if someone had scratched them in with a knife. I fumbled with the key, my hands trembling as I inserted it into the lock. The door opened with a loud creak, and I stepped inside, my heart racing. The room was small and dim, illuminated only by a single flickering lamp on the nightstand. The bed was made, the blankets neatly tucked in, but the air was thick with a sense of abandonment. I set my suitcase down and turned toward the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the view. But as I pulled back the heavy curtain, I froze. There was no window. Just a blank wall where the window should have been. A cold chill ran down my spine as I slowly turned back toward the room. That's when I noticed it, the door to the closet. It was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible between the door and the frame. I walked over, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. The door opened with a groan, revealing nothing. Just an empty closet. I let out a shaky breath, relieved. But as I turned to close it, something caught my eye. There, at the back of the closet, was a small door. No bigger than a crawlspace, it was almost hidden in the shadows. What the hell? I muttered to myself, crouching down to get a better look. The door was old and worn, the paint peeling away to reveal the bare wood underneath. I reached out, hesitating for only a moment before gripping the handle and pulling it open. Inside was a narrow, pitch-black tunnel. The air that wafted out smelled damp and cold, like something long forgotten. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared into the darkness, a deep sense of dread settling over me. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized it was coming from the tunnel. "Help me!" I shot up, slamming the closet door shut. My mind raced as I stumbled back toward the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to get out of here. Whatever this place was, it wasn't right. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, the lights flickered, and then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. Damn it! I cursed, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. But when I finally got the light on, I froze. The closet door was open again. My heart nearly stopped as I stared at the door, my mind racing. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't opened it. And yet, there it was, wide open, the small door inside it now fully visible. A low creak echoed through the room, and I turned slowly, my phone's light casting long shadows against the walls. Standing in the doorway to the tunnel was a figure, pale, gaunt, with sunken eyes that stared at me with a hollow emptiness. "Leave," the figure whispered, its voice barely more than a breath. "You don't belong here." I couldn't move, my body frozen in place as the figure took a step closer. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls shifting, warping, as if the entire space was alive, breathing. I didn't mean to," I stammered, backing up until I hit the wall behind me. The figure's eyes narrowed, and it reached out, its fingers long and skeletal. They never do. Before I could react, the lights flickered back on, and the figure vanished. The closet door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the room was silent once more. My breathing was ragged as I stood there, trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my suitcase and ran out of the room, not bothering to lock the door behind me. As I stumbled down the hallway, the whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to pulse with them, the air thick with a sense of wrongness. By the time I reached the lobby, I was drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The front desk clerk was still there, watching me with that same eerie smile. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice dripping with something that felt like mockery. I didn't respond. I just ran out the door, into the cold night air, and didn't look back. As I drove away, the hotel disappeared into the darkness behind me, swallowed by the night. But the whispers, they stayed with me. And I knew, deep down, that I'd never be able to forget what I saw in room 303. When I first arrived at the hotel, everything seemed perfectly normal. The place was modern, clean, and well kept. I had no reason to think anything strange would happen. The staff were polite, the lobby was quiet, and my room was just what I expected, simple but comfortable. After a long drive, I was happy to finally settle in. It wasn't until the second day that the elevator started acting weird. I'd been out all morning exploring the nearby town and came back in the early afternoon. As usual, I stepped into the elevator, hit the button for the 5th floor, and leaned back, waiting to reach my room. But something was off. Instead of smoothly gliding up to the 5th floor, the elevator shuddered and came to a stop at a floor I hadn't selected. The doors slid open, revealing a dim hallway that looked nothing like the rest of the hotel. The lighting was weak, casting long, eerie shadows, and the wallpaper was peeling, revealing cracked, moldy walls underneath. The air felt heavy, damp, and stale, like no one had breathed it in years. I frowned. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping out of the elevator and glancing around. There was no floor number listed anywhere, and something about this place immediately gave me a sense of unease. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the hallway. No answer. Not even a sound. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. Had I pressed the wrong button by accident? Maybe this was an unfinished floor or part of the hotel that wasn't open to guests. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked down the hallway, passing door after door. They were all closed, but something about the way they looked made me uneasy. They were old, worn down, like they hadn't been opened in years. One of the doors had a deep scratch running down the middle, as if something, or someone, had clawed at it. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a faint noise. A laugh. It was distant, almost like it was coming from behind one of the doors. My heart jumped, but I couldn't tell which room it came from. The sound echoed faintly, as if it were slipping through the walls themselves. I hurried back to the elevator, suddenly eager to leave this strange floor behind. But when I pressed the button to close the doors, they didn't respond. I pressed it again, harder this time, but the doors remained wide open. Come on. I hissed, jabbing the button again. That's when I saw something move at the end of the hallway. It was quick, just a flash of movement, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something, or someone, was there. My body tensed as I stared down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever it was moving closer. Then the lights flickered, casting the hallway into near darkness. I hit the elevator button repeatedly, panicking now. The doors finally started to close, but just as they were about to shut completely, I caught a glimpse of a shadow, a tall, dark figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator jolted as it finally started moving again. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. My hands were trembling, and my mind raced. What the hell had I just seen? What was that place? The elevator didn't take me to the 5th floor like I expected. Instead, it kept moving, past the 5th floor, the 6th, even the top floor. I stared at the panel, confused and scared. The numbers kept climbing, higher than they should. When the elevator finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal another strange floor. This one was different from the last, but just as unsettling. The hallway stretched out endlessly in both directions, dimly lit by flickering lights overhead. The carpet was stained, and the walls seemed to pulse, as if they were breathing. This time, I didn't step out. I didn't want to see what was waiting for me out there. But then, I heard something. A voice. At first, it was soft, almost like a whisper. "Help me," it said, so faint I wasn't even sure if I'd heard it. Then, it came again, louder this time. "Please, help me." It was a woman's voice, trembling with fear. My instinct told me to stay in the elevator, to press the button and get the hell out of there. But the voice, something about it pulled at me. What if someone was trapped on this floor? What if they needed help? Before I could stop myself, I stepped out of the elevator. The voice echoed down the hallway again. "Please. I'm here." I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, I reached the source of the voice. It was coming from behind one of the doors, a door that looked as old and worn as the rest, with deep scratches marring its surface. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Then, I turned it and pushed the door open. The room inside was dark, but I could see enough to know something was wrong. The walls were covered in strange symbols, scratched deep into the wood. There was a single window, but outside it was only blackness, no view, no sky, nothing. Just darkness. In the center of the room, a woman stood with her back to me, her long hair hanging limp around her shoulders. Her body was trembling, and I could hear her breathing, shallow, ragged. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly turned to face me. My breath caught in my throat. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but her mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. Blood dripped from her lips, and her hands were clenched into fists, nails digging into her own skin. "Help me," she whispered again, but this time, her voice sounded wrong. It was like two voices speaking at once, one pleading, the other mocking. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run. The woman took a step forward, that horrible grin still plastered on her face. "Help me," she repeated, but her voice had shifted completely now, deep, guttural, inhuman. I bolted for the elevator, my heart hammering in my chest. The doors were still open, and I slammed my hand on the button to close them. The woman appeared at the end of the hallway, moving faster than any human should be able to. "Help me," she screamed, her voice echoing through the corridor as she lunged toward me. The doors slid shut just in time, and I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The elevator jolted and began moving again, this time descending back to the lobby. When the doors opened, I ran out of the building without looking back. The front desk clerk didn't even try to stop me. It was as if they knew, that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I never went back to that hotel. But even now, I can still hear that voice in my nightmares, calling to me, begging for help. And sometimes, I wake up with the feeling that something is still watching me. I checked into the hotel late, feeling lucky to have found a place so quiet and empty. The receptionist had mentioned they weren't busy this time of year, which suited me fine. I could use some peace and quiet. My room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long hallway, far from the elevator. The isolation felt oddly comforting at first. The first night was uneventful. I slept deeply, exhausted from the long drive. But the second night, things started to get strange. It was close to midnight when I heard the first knock. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up in bed, groggy and confused. The sound was so clear it startled me. It came from my door. I fumbled for my phone to check the time, 12:03 a.m. I figured maybe it was a staff member, so I shuffled over to the door, half asleep, and peeked through the peephole. No one. The hallway outside was empty, the dim lights casting long shadows down the corridor. I opened the door cautiously, stepping out to look both ways, but there was no one in sight. I stood there for a moment, unsure, before closing the door and locking it again. Maybe I'd imagined it. I climbed back into bed, trying to brush off the strange feeling creeping over me. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and rushed to the door. I didn't hesitate to check the peephole, my breath catching in my throat. Again, no one. I swung the door open, stepping out into the hallway. The air felt colder than it had a few minutes ago, and there was an odd smell, musty, like old, wet wood. My eyes darted down the hall, but it was completely empty. No sound, no movement. Just silence. Frustrated, I locked the door again and returned to bed, my nerves on edge. But I didn't sleep easily. Every creak of the building made me tense, every soft gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Then, at 3 a.m., it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. This time, the sound was sharper, more urgent. My skin prickled with fear. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to look through the peephole again, but something compelled me to. When I looked, my breath caught in my throat. Someone, or something, was standing right outside the door, but it wasn't right. Their face was blurry, like a smudge on a lens, and their body seemed distorted, stretched too tall to be human. It stood there, completely still, as if it knew I was watching. I backed away from the door, my heart racing. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The knocking continued, growing faster, more frantic. Knock, 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 knock. Suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell over the room again. I waited for what felt like hours, but the knocking didn't return. The next morning, I packed my bags and left without a word. As I walked down the hallway one last time, I noticed something chilling. The door to the room next to mine was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the inside of the door, there were deep scratch marks, long, jagged, like someone, or something, had been clawing to get out. Whatever had knocked on my door that night wasn't looking for me. It was looking for a way in. And next time, it might succeed.